during the Obama administration, was it all 8 years that Republicans were talking about Sharia law? Pretty much, right? We were told that under Obama, Barack Hussein Obama, that Muslims were taking over the country, that across state houses across the country, that they were imposing Sharia law.
They're putting mosques where 9/11 happened.
Yeah. And, you know, this was a hysteria, obviously, that sparked after 9/11. But then when Obama got elected, the fact that his middle name was Hussein and the fact that he was a black man sent right-wingers into an absolute tizzy. And oddly, this comes up in this interview with J.D. Vance and Joe Rogan. Let's see how J.D. approaches it in 2024.
For a lot of people, worst case scenario, when they start thinking about religious influence on the way they're allowed to behave and the way their state is governed, worst case scenario is a state adopts Sharia law. This is worst case scenario.
Yeah.
And
What?
I think all these people that would cry against the concept of Islamophobia really need to understand what that means and what you're talking about. And to say that that's an outrageous and ridiculous idea that's never going to take place, it's kind of already worked its way into some societies.
It has.
It has.
It has.
And there are, is it Minnesota that has call to prayer? Like, is it Minneapolis?
I don't know where.
What place-
I know that there is a place in Minnesota, I believe, where they have prayer calls as a matter of local government. I do think that's happening.
That starts getting real weird.
Yeah.
Stuff like that starts getting real weird. And when you have people that are openly saying our goal is, and they've talked about this in Toronto, like activists have said, our goal is to outbreed everyone who is not Muslim and vote it out and put Sharia law in place.
Outbreed.
That's very scary.
Women have to wear burqas. This is how it works.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, and that's what to me is so crazy about some of the hyper left-wing reaction to, the idea that like somehow I want to force every man, woman, and child to go to my church is ridiculous. I just don't want to do that. I've never had any interest in doing that.
Pause it. I want them to the government to conform to my church's position on abortion, though.
My church is ridiculous. I just don't want to do that. I've never had any interest in doing that. But where you see actual real religious tyranny is increasingly in Western societies where you've had a large influx of immigrants who don't necessarily assimilate into Western values.
Oh,
this is
disgusting. All right. Great question by Joe Rogan.
I really hate this prick.
So, dispelling the notion of Islamophobia, because there's a real concern about Sharia law. So Sharia means the correct path in Arabic. So the right path law is what they're worried about. And he's also worried about calls to prayer in Minneapolis. You know, at 12 noon, we're right near a church here, our office. What happens every day at 12 noon? We hear church bells, don't we?
What do these people say, about governments not using the word Merry Christmas or whatever?
Right.
Like, who gives a shit about this? Like, a place with a large Muslim population is having, the equivalent of church bells.
But that's like, if we were to hear those church bells at noon, and I would be like, oh, that's so scary.
This is, fundamentalist libertarian. No.
That's the equivalent of what they are freaked out about, little babies.
But I'm sorry, like the topic of religious fundamentalist influence on American politics, and you start with Muslims, are you a fucking moron?
Well, they are racist. That's the problem.
Yeah.
It's just like, we're not a Christian nationalist country by, charter. Although a lot of right-wingers would like to dispel that notion. They say that we've been founded under Judeo-Christian values. We are supposed to have freedom of religion of this country, and it's not supposed to be a part of our government. But that's, in reality, not the practice. The entirety of the Republican Party, like an overwhelming majority of the Republican Party, are Christians themselves. They're also Christian Zionists, by the way. And they have been trying to impose religious fundamentalism on this country with some success for my entire lifetime and before my lifetime. The overturning of a fundamental right for abortion was because of their Republican Sharia law.
So the big Sharia law change here is the city allowed broadcast last year, but only between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. But now you get that sometimes there's one at like 5:50 a.m. So that's the Sharia. Is now we've moved from you have to wait to 7 a.m. and you can do it at 5:50, and that's how Islam takes over the world.
That's tyranny, according to J.D. Vance and Joe Rogan there. And it's like, it's so
These
instructive.
are the free speech guys.
It's free speech guys, but it's so instructive to see how Vance in real time redefines tyranny as coming from below as opposed to coming from above. And that tells you everything that you need to know about right-wing populism and these faux like frickin' Sagar and that like
Jenny.
that kind of new rebranding for right-wing politics. They always try to invent these flavors of right-wing viewpoints that obscure the very fundamental reality that it's been an identical reactionary political ideology for quite some time now, and it's centered around religious Christian fundamentalism. And it's centered around unfettered corporate power and wealth consolidation to crush people down below them. So what J.D. Vance provides as a very rich guy with a very rich benefactor in Peter Thiel, what he provides is cover for billionaires and wealthy folks so that he can say it's the Muslims, a tiny minority in this country, but yes, focus on Minnesota, hyper target racialized violence towards them, whatever.
Don't look at the fundamentalists in my coalition that want, say, IVF banned.
Because they're white and they're a part of the power structure.
They've assimilated.
They're Christian and they're assimilated. What he provides is a perfect get out of jail free card for the richest and most powerful in the country. Look below you. Tyranny comes from below, says J.D. Vance, not from on high. And that is everything you need to know about right-wing populism.
And crazy, like the free speech guys coming out and saying, look, we need to suppress the speech and calls to prayer or we're letting Sharia in. I mean, these principles and Taibbi, not to get off on too big of a tangent, but is coming off and sharing these articles that say he said himself that Elon Musk proved a disappointment on the issue of free speech. This entire ecosystem is a fraud about free speech. They use free speech like a fucking rent-a-horse. And they get as much mileage out of it as they need. And any journalist who can't understand that immediately about a guy like Joe Rogan and wants to go on Joe Rogan's show and say like, yeah, Elon's just doing this because he loves free speech that much. You should be fucking ashamed. And you should take the people rubbing your nose in it.
I mean, Washington Post just did an analysis of what Twitter is now. I mean, it's like 90% of posts that are prioritized are right wing. I mean, like they use free speech so cynically because they're lying to get what they want.
Yep, which is also always true. I mean, Hubert Humphrey, back in the 30s, I believe it was, went up against Klansmen and anti-Semites under the name Silver Legion, and their big public-facing demand was free speech too. And it's interesting how things don't fucking change. And I'm, as somebody who, like, I wanted to work for the Index on Censorship, which I now have a little bit of critique about in terms of, like, maybe the positions on Cold War, Israel, whatever. But I like all that stuff. I like free speech. I don't like Nazis and fascists and these extreme right-wingers using it as a vehicle. And I think I would like more free speech people and people that sell Substack subscriptions off of it to join me in that allergy a little bit more.
Take a call here. Calling from an 801 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 801?
Oh, I believe that's me.
That's you. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Excellent. My name's Ethan. I'm from Washington, 801 area code from Utah originally, but I moved here a few years ago.
Okay, Ethan in Washington.
Yeah, I wanted to sort of point at something that is a little bit annoying. So I don't know if y'all saw, Green Party vice presidential candidate was in some kind of, I don't know if it was an interview or virtual town hall or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, he said something about, biological males not belonging in women's sports.
And that there should be some restrictions on abortion.
Yeah, I saw the abortion thing, which was even, I mean...
I missed that.
He said and I don't know how recent it is or whatever. Frankly, the Green Party isn't terribly relevant to me, but Ware does not seem like somebody who I would vote for, frankly. Like saying there needs to be some
definitely.
kind of... Basically, he has Tim Pool's position on abortion.
Right. And I wanted to sort of bring this up because, I don't know if you guys were planning on covering it necessarily. Again, like, Green Party's not super important, but there are a lot of, like, progressive and, leftist people in this election cycle, and it might be too late at this point to sort of appeal to them if they've been considering, like, no, I don't want to vote for Kamala Harris because of, the ongoing genocide in Palestine. And, hey, look, I get it, but Jill Stein and Butch Ware are not going to fix this because they're not going to win. So, like, what's your actual strategy? I think it illustrates something interesting, though, because I think people sort of assume that because they're running on the Green Party ticket, they're going to be more progressive on social issues. Mm-hmm. And this obviously illustrates, like, that's not true. You shouldn't make that assumption. And I would sort of, if there is anyone listening that is interested in, being more informed about this, I guess. Like, I just don't think we should be making these assumptions about the Green Party. Just
I don't think people do here.
Historically.
Well, look, I mean, I think you're totally right. I think hopefully this is the death of the frickin' Jill Stein Green Party at this point, because if we're going to have a third party, it should be a socialist party. Like, that's the reality.
It's like worker generally. And maybe they think they're doing that by giving up on social issues, but who is good at doing that? The Democratic Party.
And that's right. I mean, Harris is kind of abandoning advocacy for trans people during this, post convention period, but like, at least in messaging. But I think to add to what you're saying, the Green Party is not in that way to the left of the Democratic Party. Like, if there was a socialist party, that would make sense. That is where you can actually, if you build it up and you focus down ballot, that's the kind of way you could exert leverage on the Democrats, because it's actually a coherent political theory. The Green Party, I would not be shocked if they get shady money. Jill Stein seems pretty off her rocker. I'd met her back in 2016. My impression of her was that she'd be a very nice adjunct college professor, and that's basically it. Like, and I don't, for people that are just so disgusted by the genocide in Gaza, I have a lot of, sympathy for that, obviously. In the closing weeks I think I'm matching a lot of other people's urgency about this, is like, we have to defeat Donald Trump. And the Green Party's not serious about moving the Democratic Party to the left in any real way. That requires a more robust political party, and we're not there to build that at that point. So I thought that interview was very revealing, as was her interview with Mehdi Hassan.
And I saw that one as well, and I also thought that their responses were pretty disappointing there as well. So just thank you for articulating all of that. Just one quick last thing, more actually relevant to real world politics that matter to people. If you are in Washington State, please, I understand if you don't want to vote for Kamala Harris, for the reasons outlined, I get it. There are still a lot of important stuff on the ballot locally. There are 4 really, really conservative initiatives that have to do with long-term health care and cutting funding for that. That have to do with cutting funding for infrastructure, cutting funding for green energy, like long-term plans for green energy. There's just a big push right now in Washington State. So everybody, please, if you're in Washington State and you haven't voted yet and you're on the fence, these are important initiatives that you need to be paying attention to and voting against if you care about any of the things that I just mentioned. So,
completely.
Thank you all so much. Left is best.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the call. Bobby Western says, total vanity. Zionism equals main character syndrome. Kind of true. A Square, Emma, I'm on the brink of losing a friendship over this genocide, and my friend who considers herself an American Jew and whom I've never heard call herself a Zionist, articulated that same BS narrative about how Israel is the only bastion of democracy surrounded by Muslim countries, and further how they are fighting a proxy war against Iran. It's all been an eye-opener for me and sad watching this friend go from being so-called liberal to her stance on Israel's atrocities. I went through a basically identical situation, and we have repaired things, so there is still hope. But, you know, I don't know what to say. I mean, the thing is if you can find some common ground and hold on to, we have shared values on this, on gay rights in America. We have shared values on anti-racism. You know, eventually, if your friend is, as you say,
reality is reality.
Eventually there's going to be, a reckoning. And if your friend is self-aware, and it sounds like, if they're liberal on other issues, they'll probably still be engaging in this. Eventually they will feel shame for their past position. And at least my strategy has been like, try not to say I told you so, because it's not really that helpful. I think you can lose respect, you can feel differently, and all of that is valid. But I would encourage you to just basically say, like, as long as they're at the very least saying it's horrible what's happening, this is very sad, Netanyahu is so bad, I think you don't need to cut them out at that point. I think you can bring them along. I really do feel that way. So that is my advice, even though I can say from firsthand experience how painful it is. Miss Heathen, Green Party VP Butch Ware says, I don't think that biological males should participate in female sports. Yes, we heard that. Nick from PA, I think it's helpful dispelling the things about the only democracy in the Middle East by pointing out how Western militaries and governments help create these dictatorships nearby for their own interests as well.
Yeah, we have a lot of allies in that area with few democracies.
Yes.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.